I was in position by IPM, and sent my followers away. Byra, still protesting with instructions, to call to me from the bed of the China next morning before approaching. With their departure I was left to my own devices for the next 17 hours. You will appreciate that from my position in the midst of the bamboo clump my view was entirely restricted on all sides except for the narrow lane of jungle right in front of me, with the human cadaver in the foreground. Much as I would have preferred a wider range of vision, I knew I would be thankful once the hours of darkness fell, as the more I could see by day the more I would be exposed to the man-eater after dark, when the tables would be turned and he could see while I could not. The human remains, being hidden from the sky by the canopy of overhanging bamboos, were not troubled by vultures. Flies, however, covered it in hordes, and the stench soon began to get painfully noticeable. I will not burden you with descriptions of the sounds of a jungle evening and the close of a jungle day, beyond mentioning that they were practically all present on that occasion and offered sweet accord to my jungle-loving ears. Nothing happened before darkness set in, which it did both earnestly and rapidly, till I was left in Stygian blackness, intensified by the additional shadows cast by the towering bamboo stems above me. It was so dark that I could not see my own hands as they rested on my lap. I would have to feel for the trigger and the torch switch, and indeed, everything. All that was visible was the luminous dial of my wristwatch showing that it was 7:45, 10 long hours before daylight came. I knew that during this time I would have to strain myself to the utmost in pitting my poor, human, and town-bred skill against that of the king of the jungles, at which he was a past master, with decades of skillful ancestors behind him, namely, at listening and hearing. For I could not see an inch before me, while he could see clearly. Nor could I smell him at all, but neither could he smell me. For success I would have to depend entirely on my hearing the sound of his soft approach, and I well knew from long experience how soundless the approach of a cautious tiger can be. I would have to remain absolutely silent myself. Worse, the slightest movement or sound from me would betray my presence to those ever-acute ears, and once he knew I was there, only one of two possible things could happen. Either his courage would fail him and he would desert the kill, or he would attack me by a sudden pounce through the opening in front of me, before I was aware of his coming. I certainly had no wish to become the next item on his menu. Therefore, I could do nothing but sit absolutely and completely still. Mosquitoes found their way even inside that clump, and tortured me acutely. Once some cold creeping thing passed across my lap. It had length, but no legs, and was undoubtedly a snake. Movement at that time meant a bite and, if it was a poisonous snake, possibly death. With extreme difficulty, I controlled my twitching nerves, and the snake glided away. I could just sense its rustle as it slipped between the intervening bamboo stems and was gone. By and by my throat began to tickle and I had an overpowering desire to cough. I counted sheep to divert my thoughts from this urge till it eventually died away. At 10:25 p.m. I heard a distinct sound in the jungle behind me. A faint rustle, then all was still. The minutes dragged by. Then it came again, on my right and in line with the very clump where I was sitting. Heavy breathing was clearly audible. A very faint grunt, silence, another grunt, and then the quick rush of a heavy soft body before me. Was it on the kill, or was it staring me in the face from the inky darkness, perhaps even at that instant draw the powerful hind legs below the supple belly to catapult itself upon me? And I could not see even the end of my own nose. I had already cocked my rifle, and had slowly raised the muzzle, finger on trigger, to meet the coming onslaught at point-blank range. The perspiration poured down my face in sheer terror, and my whole body trembled with nervous suppression. I depressed the torch switch and the brilliant beam blazed out upon a large hyena, standing above the kill, growling to find out it was a dead man that lay there. He stared blankly at the light for seconds and was gone. I could have laughed aloud with relief and the thought that I was safe once more at least for the present. Anyhow, my position had been temporarily revealed and I could only hope the man-eater was not in the vicinity to become aware of it. Hastily, I took advantage of the disturbance to swallow a mouthful of hot, refreshing tea from the flask I had brought, and quickly move my cramped limbs before resettling myself. For the remainder of my vigil I was in Stygian darkness again, but considerably refreshed and relieved of the morbid nervous tension that had threatened to overcome me a few minutes before. At 10 minutes to 12 I heard the moan of a tiger in the distance. This was repeated again at intervals of 5 to 10 minutes, the last being at 12:20, and from a spot I judged to be a quarter of a mile away. It was difficult to gauge the exact distance of sound in this densely wooded locality, but I thanked Providence and my lucky stars that the tiger had decided on making a noisy approach rather than the silent one I had dreaded. A quarter of an hour slipped by without further sign. In the meantime, the usual midnightly jungle breeze had sprung up, to cause the bamboo stems to groan and creak against each other weirdly. This aroused a fresh and ominous thought in my mind. Supposing one of the several cut bamboo stems, balancing upright above my head, was to become dislodged and slip downwards under its own weight. The cut end would impale me to the ground, like some rare beetle in a collector's box. The thought was not very pleasant, and for a moment it eclipsed even the thought of the man-eater and its proximity. And then I heard the crack of a bone on the cadaver lying in the darkness before me. Slowly I lifted the rifle to shoulder level, steadied it and depressed the torch switch for the second time that night. But nothing happened. I depressed the switch again and again, but still nothing happened. Undoubtedly the bulb had burned out or some connection had come loose. I had now the choice of sitting very still till the tiger fed and departed, or changing my rifle for the smooth bore and attempting a shot. I quickly decided to use the gun. Ever so gently, I lowered the rifle to ground level and then groped silently in the dark for the .12 bore. Finding it, I drew it towards me and then began maneuvering the weapon to shoulder level. I could only hope that the tiger was looking away from me, or was too engrossed in his meal to notice all the movement that was going on in the midst of the bamboo clump. And then misfortune befell me. Slightly, but quite distinctly, the muzzle of the gun came into contact with a bamboo stem and there was an audible knock. The sounds of feeding stopped abruptly, followed by a deep-chested and rumbling growl. Hastily I got the gun into position and pressed the switch of the new torch. Luckily it did not fail, and the beam burst forth to show clearly a huge striped form as it sprang off the cadaver and behind the bamboo clump next to mine. From there a succession of earth-shaking roars rent the silence, as the man-eater demonstrated in no uncertain manner his displeasure at being disturbed, and his discovery of a human being in the near vicinity. Keeping the torch alight, and a sharp lookout for his sudden attack, with one hand I groped for the spare bulb I always carried in my pocket. I extracted it and kept it on my lap. Still working with one hand, I unscrewed the cover of the torch on my rifle, extracted the faulty bulb and substituted the new one. Fortunately, the torch was one of those focused by adjustment from the rear and not the front end, and as the rifle torch was now functioning again, I extinguished that on the smooth bore, though I kept the gun ready across my knees for any further eventuality. The tiger was still demonstrating, but had moved to a position in my rear. I knew I was safe enough, except from a frontal attack. To guard against this I would have to keep the torch alight continuously, but as over 5 hours still remained till daylight, there was the certainty the batteries would run low, even on both torches, if burned incessantly. So I switched off the light and relied on my hearing. When things became too silent for a long stretch, I would switch on the beam, expecting to see the creeping form of the tiger approaching me. But this did not happen and he kept his distance, demonstrating frequently till past 2:30 a.m., when I heard his growls receding in the distance. No doubt he was disgusted, but by this time welcomed his disgust. You may be certain I kept a sharp lookout for the rest of the night against the tiger's return, for the habits of a man-eater are often unpredictable, but the chill hours of early morning crept past without event, till at last the cheery cry of the silver-hackled jungle cock made me grateful for the dawn and the light of another day, which on more than one occasion during the terrible hours that had just dragged by I had not thought of seeing. Sion, the hello of Nay followers from the bed of the China River fell like music on my tired ears, and I shouted back for them to advance, as the coast was clear. With their arrival I staggered forth from my night-long cramped position, to finish the tea that remained in my flask and to smoke a long overdue pipe, while relating the events of the night. All three of the men knew me most intimately, but although they did not say as much, it was clearly evident they were surprised to see me alive, for the roars and demonstrations of the frustrated man-eater had been clearly audible to them, where they had spent the night with the shivering herdsmen of Panipati. Byra now said that he would like to take a quick walk up the China to Muthur, just 4 miles away, and fetch his hunting dog, which he felt would be of considerable help in following the trail of the tiger. This dog was a very nondescript white and brown village cur, answering to the most unusual name of Kushkushkaria. How it happened to possess this strange name I had never been able to fathom. In calling the animal, Byra used the first 2 syllables in a normal tone, but would accentuate the third into a weird rising cry resembling that of a night heron. I had never been able to emulate him in this, and had contented myself in the past with Kush alone, which the dog would obey without hesitation. Insisting that he at least took Sauri as company, I returned with Ranga to Oatamalai and had a hot breakfast, and a bath in the Kaveri, followed by a long overdue sleep. I awoke at 2 p.m. with the return of Byra, Sauri, and the much-prized Kushkushkaria, who wagged his tail at me in joyful recognition and nuzzled his cold snout against my shoulder. Swallowing a hasty lunch and plenty of hot tea, we turned to the spot of my night's adventure, accompanied by the relatives of the dead man, who yearned to bring away his remains, but were far too afraid to visit the spot unprotected. As may be imagined, the corpse was by this time smell-ing to high heaven, so they decided to carry it only as far as the China River and bury the remains on the bank. With their departure, poor Kush made a brave attempt to follow the cold trail of the tiger but was not very successful in going even 100 yards. Probably the stench that still pervaded the atmosphere and lingered on the quiet evening air had overpowered all faint smell that might have remained in the tiger's tracks over the hard ground. We returned to camp just before nightfall, a very disappointed group. The following day nothing happened, but on the morn of the day after, Ranga nearly met his end. Each day, as I have already said, Byra, Sauri and I scoured the forest in opposite directions in the hope of locating the tiger, while it was Ranga's duty to feed and water our 3 baits, none of which had been killed up to that time. He had made an early start that morning, with another villager for company, and had already visited the bait at the well on Mundakipalam, which was found untouched, as expected. After depositing some of the straw carried by his companion, Ranga watered the animal and then the 2 men moved down Mundakipalam itself, to look to the second bait tied at its confluence with the China River. The villager was leading, Ranga bringing up the rear. They had come about a mile from the road when, standing 50 yards from them in the middle of the dry stream, was the tiger. The villager dropped his bundle of straw and shinned up the only tree at hand. For the few seconds it took him to climb a reasonable height, he blocked Ranga's progress, and within those few seconds the man-eater had reached the base of the tree, reared up on its hind legs, and with a raking sweep of its forepaw removed the loincloth around Ranga's waist, the end of which had hung downwards, while he climbed. The tiger halted momentarily to worry the cloth, while Ranga, minus his loincloth, climbed energetically, overhauling and almost knocking his companion off the tree, in his efforts to reach the higher terraces and safety. The disappointed tiger remained below, looking upwards and growling savagely, while Ranga and his companion shouted loudly for help, telling the world at large that they were being killed and eaten. Fortunately, a party of people, traveling in large number bears for safety's sake, happened to be coming from Pentagram and were at that time in the vicinity of the well, from where they heard the shouts and recognized its message. At the double the whole group, men, women and children of all ages, covered the remaining 4 miles to reach me at Oatamalai with the news. Not knowing it was Ranga who had been attacked, and Byra and Sauri not having yet returned, I jog-trotted the distance alone, arriving at the well in record time. From here I could plainly hear the shouting myself. By this time, the tiger had left the foot of the tree and vanished into the forest, but the 2 men were afraid to descend, for fear it might be in hiding and rush forth on them. Hoping to surprise the man-eater, I refrained from answering them while hastening forward as swiftly as caution permitted. When I reached the tree, however, it was only Ranga and his companion who were surprised at seeing me, till I explained the circumstances. We then attempted to follow the tiger, but no signs of him were evident on the hard ground, so we desisted and turned back to visit the remaining baits. I accompanied the men, and we found both animals unscathed. It was past midday when we returned to Oatamalai with the despairing knowledge that the leery tiger we were after apparently was not going to kill any of our baits. Nor, with the experience I had had with him, was he ever likely to return to a kill again. To say I was exceedingly crestfallen and despondent would be putting it too mildly. The wily man-eater of Mundakippalam looked like being one of those tigers that would stay put for a long time to come, if it did not go away of its own accord to continue its depredations elsewhere. And then, about 7 a.m. 2 days later, came the event that brings this story to an end. As I have mentioned, in coincidence it remarkably resembled the events with which the tale started. Again a group of persons, except that they were 10 in number for the sake of safety, had placed their baskets, laden with fish for pentagram, on the ground, to water at the well beside Mundakippalam and to rest a while. Women being in the party, one of the men stepped behind the nearest tree to ease himself. There was a short roar, an elongated golden body with black stripes hurled itself as if from nowhere, and the squatter had disappeared. By good fortune, Byra, Ranga, Sari and myself had set forth in company to visit our baits and were hardly a mile behind the party of 10. Soon we met the 9 who were returning with the sad news of the one who was not. Running forward as fast as we could, we reached the well, where I whispered to Ranga and Sari to climb up adjacent trees and await my further need. Byra and I crept forward and, behind the tree chosen by the unfortunate man to answer the call of nature, we picked up the trail of his blood as it had ebbed away in the jaws of the tiger. With Byra tracking, and closely in his wake with rifle to shoulder, and scanning every bush, we had penetrated only a short 100 yards when we heard the sharp snap of a bone in the mouth of the feeding tiger. The sound had come from a half-left direction ahead of us. Laying a restraining hand on Byra, I motioned him to remain where he was, while I crept cautiously forward, knowing well that under such circumstances a companion becomes an additional life to care for. The forest was still and breathless, and the sound of gnawing and crunching could now be heard more clearly. Very carefully and silently edging closer, with downcast eyes watching each footstep, for fear I should rustle a leaf, snap a twig, or overturn a loose stone, it took me a considerable time to advance a mere 15 yards. From there I thought I could see the slayer, crouched on the ground. A few paces nearer, and suddenly he arose and faced me, a dripping human arm, torn off at the shoulder, held across his mouth. The wicked eyes gazed at me with blank surprise, then a snarl began to contort the giant face, rendered more awful by the gruesome remains it carried. The 300 grains of cordite, behind the soft-nosed Winchester bullet, propelled the missile with upwards of 35 tons to the square inch, correctly into the base of the massive neck. The human arm dropped into the grass with a plop. The animal lurched forward with a gurgling grunt. Quick working of the underlever of the old, trusted rifle, and a second missile buried itself in that wicked heart. It beat no more. The man-eating tiger of Mundakippalam lurched forward to his end in almost the same spot where he had begun his wicked career months before. A large male, he was without blemish. Undoubtedly a wicked tiger by nature, he had evidently turned man-eater through an unlucky chance. On such trivial circumstances often hang the threads of fate. Anxious about my welfare, my wife surprised me by arriving that same afternoon in her car from Bangalore to ask me whether I ever remembered I had a home and family, and if it was not about time I thought of returning to it. We motored Byra, via Pentagram, back to his dugout near Muthur, where we were just in time to be present at the happy arrival of his 5th progeny. And the arrival was in this fashion. A shallow hole, hammock-shaped and about of the same dimension, had been scooped in the sands of the China River, the hollow then being liberally filled with soft green leaves, freshly separated from their stalks. In this hammock the mother, about to give birth, lay when the pains of childbirth began. The husband acted as midwife. No medicines, no ergot, no hot water, no cotton wool. Only tender green leaves, and the sharp edge of a flint, to saw through the navel cord, the bleeding stump of which is staunched with ashes from an ordinary wood fire. A couple of hours after giving birth, the mother got up with her baby and went to the hole on the banks of Anabidahala where they live. The husband filled in the hammock-like hollow, leaves, placenta, and all, with the loose sands of the China River. In such simple and hardy fashion are the Byras of the forest born. So do they live and so do they die, true children of nature and of the jungle. Long may they continue to exist, untrammeled and untarnished by civilization, happy and free to roam as they will over mountain, fen and forest glen, till death claims them and they return unostentatiously to Mother Earth, from which they have so unostentatiously sprung. On the morning of that day I had shot a peacock, and this we had for dinner, prepared in the jungle fashion. All feathers are removed, with the entrails, head and neck. Incisions with a knife are made in the flesh of the bird, into which are inserted salt, spices, cloves and curry powder, to taste. The whole is then plastered over with fresh, clean mud from the river bank to a thickness of well over an inch, so that it finally resembles a ball of wet mucilage. A fire of embers is built, the ball placed on it, and surrounded on all sides and above with still more embers. The fire is kept continuously alive by the addition of more wood, but the aim is to have glowing embers, rather than a blazing fire. After some time the mud begins to crack, and finally falls away in sections. Then is the time to remove the bird before it is burnt. With a little practice in the art of mud roasting, a truly superb roasted peacock or jungle fowl can be prepared for dinner, the finished product putting many a housewife to shame. Friends, next time I will come with another thrilling story by Kenneth Anderson. Till then, bye and take care. Please don't forget to like and subscribe my channel.